You see what's wrong with the world, and you want to fix it. You believe in causes like equality, fairness, and progress, and you should. Your intentions are good. But what if the script you're following wasn't written by you? What if the very language you use, the righteous anger you feel, and even the targets you choose have been shaped for you, and not by your allies, but by the very power structures you think you're fighting against? It sounds backward, I know, maybe even a little absurd. But when you look at history and then take a hard look at right now, you start to see a pattern, a kind of playbook, one used by powerful people and institutions to turn the weapons of social justice into tools for controlling the conversation and ultimately protecting their own power. This isn't to say injustice isn't real. It is very real. This is about understanding how the response to that injustice can be skillfully and sometimes unintentionally redirected. This strategy of absorbing and neutralizing movements isn't new. For centuries, powerful establishments have faced down radical ideas that threaten to change things fundamentally. And time and again, they've proven to be incredibly good at co-opting them. Take the radical labor movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They weren't just asking for better wages. They were demanding worker ownership, economic democracy, a complete overhaul of the capitalist system. That was a genuine threat to the industrialists of the day. The response was a masterclass in narrative control. At first, they tried suppression, but that just created martyrs and fueled the fire. The more effective long-term strategy was to slowly co-opt the movement. The revolutionary edges were sanded down. Radical demands for owning the factory were channeled into more negotiable demands for better pay and safer conditions inside the factory. The corporate world learned that it could give in on things like the 40-hour work week or safety regulations to drain the movement of its revolutionary energy. They adopted the language of fairness, all while making sure the fundamental power structure stayed exactly the same. Or think about the counterculture of the 1960s, with its anti-consumerist, anti-establishment spirit. It didn't take long for that to be domesticated. Within a decade, corporations were using images of rebellion and freedom to sell you everything from soda to blue jeans. The symbols of revolt became marketing tools. The look of liberation was captured and sold back to everyone, completely stripped of its political substance. This pattern is the key. A movement doesn't have to be crushed if it can be steered. It doesn't need to be silenced if its language can be adopted and redefined. So the real question isn't if this can happen, but how is it happening right now? Today's playbook is faster and more sophisticated, using social media and the language of modern academia. But the principles haven't changed. Thinkers like Olufemi Taiwo and Frederick de Boer have a name for it: elite capture. It's the process where the goals and language of a social movement get hijacked by the people with the most resources and influence, who then redirect it to serve their own interests. The first, most obvious mechanism is the co-opting of language. Words that were once specific and radical, born from decades of activism, are now spoken fluently by the very institutions they were meant to critique. Corporations roll out massive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They publish sustainability reports and sponsor pride parades. But this often works more like a PR shield than a real commitment to change. The focus shifts from, say, challenging exploitative labor practices to celebrating diverse representation within the existing corporate hierarchy. It makes the system look better, without actually changing how it functions. The second mechanism is something we could call the Great Diversion. Elite-driven narratives have a way of subtly shifting our focus from universal class-based problems toward more fragmented culture-based conflicts. This is the most brilliant and insidious part of the strategy. A unified working class demanding economic redistribution is a real threat to concentrated wealth. A population divided over cultural and identity-based grievances is not. In fact, it's much easier to manage. As writer Freddie de Boer has argued, this creates a situation where a movement's energy gets poured into symbolic fights instead of material ones. We see these endless, furious online battles over the words people use, a casting choice in a movie, or the symbolism in a commercial. These debates are emotionally consuming. They feel important, but they almost never threaten the economic engines that create inequality in the first place. So, while we're busy debating semantics, the systems that concentrate wealth and power just keep humming along in the background. Activism can become a performance of virtue for people who are already comfortable, instead of a fight for real change for those who aren't. The third mechanism is framing the narrative. Through their massive influence over media and culture, elites can set the terms of the debate. They can frame systemic problems as the fault of individuals. Economic precarity, for example, is presented as the result of bad personal choices, not as the outcome of specific policy decisions that benefit a few. This framing lets the system and those who run it off the hook. It makes the status quo feel natural and inevitable, discouraging any collective action that might challenge the root of the problem. So, why does this happen? Is it some grand conspiracy hatched in a secret room? The reality is more systemic and less cinematic. A really compelling explanation comes from the work of historical social scientist Peter Turchin and his theory of elite overproduction. Here's the theory in a nutshell. A society starts producing way more people with elite aspirations, people with wealth, advanced degrees, and ambition, than there are elite jobs for them to fill. Think of thousands upon thousands of law school grads fighting for a handful of top firm positions, or PhDs competing for a shrinking number of professorships. This creates a brutal, zero-sum game of musical chairs among the elites themselves. To get an edge in this fight, different factions of the elite need to rally people to their side. And what's a more powerful way to build a following than to champion a social justice cause? One faction of the elite can use the language of social justice to attack a rival institution for not being progressive enough. Another can use it to critique a competitor. The conflict we see playing out in public isn't always a straightforward battle between the powerful and the powerless. Often, it's a proxy war between competing factions of the powerful. The social justice cause becomes the battlefield, and its supporters become foot soldiers in a war where the prize, power, status, control, is just going to end up with a different group of elites. It stops being about solving the injustice and starts being about using the injustice as a weapon in that internal struggle. The intense polarization we all feel is a symptom of this. The genuine anger of the public gets harnessed as fuel for these power games, which helps explain why these movements can generate so much noise and fury, but so little fundamental change. If this way of looking at the world makes sense to you, and you want to keep digging into the hidden mechanics of power, then subscribe and hit the notification bell. We go deep on this stuff every week. And let me know in the comments, where have you seen this dynamic play out in your own life? So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a new lens, a way to see beyond the surface-level fights that dominate the news and our social media feeds. The point of this isn't to make you cynical or to tell you that fighting for justice is a waste of time. It's the opposite. It's about making that fight smarter and more effective. It's about recognizing that the language of liberation can be used for control, that our righteous anger can be steered to serve interests that are not our own. This isn't about left versus right. That binary is one of the most effective tools they use to keep us divided. This is, and always has been, about the powerful versus the powerless. The real challenge, then, is to reclaim the narrative, to constantly ask that uncomfortable question. Cui bono? Who benefits? Who really benefits from us fighting each other over this specific thing, in this specific way? Who benefits when the problem is defined in a way that never, ever touches the core distribution of wealth and power? Real resistance starts when we refuse to follow their script. It means building coalitions based on what we have in common, our material interests, even with people who don't vote the same way we do. It means focusing on policies that deliver real, tangible benefits to the majority, not just symbolic victories that make a handful of elites feel good about themselves. It means developing our own narrative power, the ability to tell our own story, frame our own problems, and build our own solutions. The first step is seeing the game for what it is.